Hello, welcome to The Big Fight. It's been a really interesting week. Gujarat finished voting. A bunch of exit polls all came out, most of which were saying that the BJP is going to be winning on Monday both in Gujarat and in Himachal Pradesh, a complete landslide in Himachal Pradesh. So that was one interesting development. The other big interesting development has happened this morning. Rahul Gandhi taking over as the president of the Congress party, making a speech, setting out what he thinks is the main difference between him and the Congress party and the BJP. And we're going to get all of our experts to weigh in on that as well. But there was a third element that happened this week, and that is something that I do want to spend some time on The Big Fight today, because it is a really serious charge and a serious accusation that was made during the course of the Gujarat elections. And that charge was that there is a systematic effort being made to undermine institutions. That by itself, not necessarily entirely new. You've heard about the CBI being a caged parrot for, 15, 20 years. You hear that charge. Now, more recently, that same charge is being made about the Enforcement Directorate, about the Income Tax Department, about other various enforcement wings of the government, that they are all acting at the behest of the government to target political rivals. So that part is not that new or that unusual. What is unusual, relatively speaking, is that the Election Commission was actually brought into it. And a specific allegation was made by the Congress party saying that the Election Commission has played a biased role in the Gujarat elections. We've been hearing those charges about the EVMs, obviously, for a while, but the conduct of the elections themselves not completely fair. And that's a serious charge, because we've got used to putting the Election Commission on a pedestal above all politics. Is any of this true? Is any of this fair? That's what we're about to turn our attention to. But before I do that, let me quickly welcome all the guests whom we have with us. Mr. Krishnamurthy is joining us, former Chief Election Commissioner. It's a pleasure, sir, to have you with us. And it's also a privilege to have another former Chief Election Commissioner with us, Dr. S.Y. Qureshi. Thank you both so much for joining us. And I am going to really get your take on what's been said about the Election Commission and about other institutions as well. We also have with us Amitabh Pandey, very senior former IAS officer. It's great to have you with us. KC Singh as well can perhaps weigh in. Both of you have been in the government, and I'm going to be asking you whether you think there is any undermining of any sort of institutions. It's great to have with us Dr. Balashankar, who's a political analyst, former editor of the Organizer Weekly. It's Ejaz Ilmi is with us as well, member of the BJP, and Pawan Khera, spokesperson of the Congress party, joining us as well, as indeed is Ashish Khaitan of the Aam Aadmi Party, somebody who for a long period of time has been talking about the erosion of institutions. All right, can I get you in first, Dr. Qureshi? It's been, we've got used to feeling that the Election Commission, like the judiciary, is above all party politics. So it was, I'm sure it must have been a somewhat uncomfortable sight for you and indeed for Mr. Krishnamurthy to see the role and the credibility of the Election Commission being dragged into some question right now.
Indeed, the last few weeks have been very unfortunate for the reputation of the Election Commission, which is very sad. I wish it had not happened. Reputations take years to build, but minutes to get demolished. And I think Election Commission is going through a very tricky phase, and it has to be very, very careful to watch its step and guard the reputation.
Mr. Krishnamurthy, let me get you in as well. Do you think the sort of charges that have been coming, and I'm just going to restate them for people, the shifting, we've had this entire question mark over the EVMs, unsubstantiated, but that's been around, for a period of time. Shifting of the Gujarat date, something else that was called into question. And then, of course, FIR against one person for giving an interview on TV channels and one political party, and not against others. That's where the Congress party really came out with its charges. How would you view all of these events?
Well, it's very unfortunate that the political parties are very anxious to criticize the Election Commission's independence. I do agree there are some areas where probably we can improve our functioning, but that doesn't mean that you can question the independence and the integrity of the Election Commission. We are, of course, the Election Commission is used to these criticisms at the time of the election. We have seen many political parties, not only in the general elections, but in the various state elections. But I think a standard has been kept in the Election Commission, which I think is very difficult for the successive election commissioners to deviate from. Though there are individual instances where probably criticism may be valid or may be partially valid, but I think on the whole the Election Commission has been an impartial institution, and I think traditions are being kept, although there are some individual opinions where it may not be, that it is not as high a standard as it ought to be.
Right, Mr. Krishnamurthy, I think it's important to underline for everybody why institutions are important. You were Chief Election Commissioner. An absolutely unexpected defeat in 2004 for the NDA, the UPA coming into power at that time. But nobody ever questioned, was this a free and fair election? Nobody questions the conduct, and this is something which we've got used to in the last 20 to 25 years. Are you scared that we are starting to see a period where elections will be called into question? Is that a possibility, or do you think by now that's not likely to happen?
I am not surprised. I think the political parties will employ every instrument available to question the conduct of the elections. But I am not scared, because the Election Commission has got enough powers to deal with these situations, but it has to improve its own style of functioning if necessary, depending upon the challenges thrown before it. But I am sure that the institution will survive. The high standards that have been built over a period of time will be maintained, although individual aberrations are bound to be there sometimes.
Okay, so let me ask you about some of the questions that have come up. Dr. Qureshi, the EVM question, that EVMs aren't entirely safe, obviously some of it just is not practical. You know, they are hacking into some Bluetooth signal or Wi-Fi signals. It's practically not possible. You've looked at the EVMs very closely till 2012. Is there any chance at all that there could be something wrong with the EVMs, Dr. Qureshi?
Vikram, if you allow me, before addressing this EVM question, can I comment on what Mr. Krishnamurthy said about hope that the institution survives? I would rather say that hope is no strategy. We must have institutional safeguard, and the biggest institutional safeguard, extremely important safeguard, is that there should be a system. The most powerful commission in the world has the weakest system of appointment. We are just appointed by the government of the day, and for the last 30 years we have all been suggesting that we should be appointed by a collegium. We would feel stronger, morally stronger, because the perceptions are extremely important. Even if we act fairly, but if somebody raises a question, it does hurt. Therefore, if we are appointed through a neutral system of collegium, you have collegium for lesser institutions like CVC and CIC. They are not constitutional bodies. They are institutional, they are statutory bodies. Even a head of a department of a government, which is Director CBI, has a collegium with Chief Justice of India and Leader of Opposition as members. But here the most powerful political body has no collegium at all. So therefore, instead of just banking on hope, we must have institutional safeguard. It's a pity that for the last 30 years no government has paid any heed to this suggestion, because they all think they are there for good, and instead of working on the long-term national interest, they just pass their time.
Okay, Mr. Krishnamurthy, let me throw that to you, because actually that could apply to all the other institutions we're going to be talking about, no doubt, during the course of the program, because actually that same argument can be made. The minute you have the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the Income Tax or anybody else answerable or in some ways appointed by the government of the day, then there is always that question mark which potentially could hang. Although I have to say that for most of the last 20-30 years, there have been very few questions over the Election Commission. Mr. Krishnamurthy, the fact that it's being appointed by the government of the day, do you agree with Dr. Qureshi that it's a possible weakness?
Not only that I agree with him, but we have officially recommended this change. We have the Election Commission has always asked for a collegium for appointment of the election commissioners. These are institutional reforms which of course have to take place from time to time. There are umpteen number of reforms we have suggested, but that doesn't mean that if these reforms are not carried out, the institution cannot survive. The institution has to survive, and we have to ensure that the persons and the principles that are followed are above board.
Okay.
I totally agree that reforms are absolutely necessary.
Okay, so let me ask you now, some of the recent examples, do you think maybe things could have been handled differently. I was asking you, Dr. Qureshi, about the EVM question, but also in the specific comments that have come, FIR against one party, but quote-unquote road show being allowed the next day, press conferences being allowed to be held at airports which are not attracting FIRs and so on and so forth. You've been hearing all the debate about it. Do you think everything is, would you have any questions about what's been happening? Dr. Qureshi?
Election Commission has more facts than anybody else, therefore, from both sides, therefore, without knowing all that, it is difficult to judge. However, it has always been the effort of the Election Commission to be fair to everyone, and level playing field is our buzzword, the keyword. We have to measure everything on that. And public perception getting disturbed that Election Commission has favored one party, the ruling party, and has gone against, is very, very dangerous.
Dr. Qureshi, you're being extremely diplomatic. Dr. Qureshi, you're being extremely diplomatic, as I guess you have to be as a former CEC. Let me just put it to you. Would you have handled things differently this week when it comes to the FIRs and the other steps that have been questioned?
Well, as I said, Vikram, I should have full facts before me, but prima facie, probably I would have handled some of the things differently. For instance, I would not have had two different set of dates. I would have done what we have always done, which is holding the elections together and keeping a gap of 12 days. Probably I would not have done. And we not only have to be fair, we have to appear to be fair. This maxim applies to Election Commission more than anybody else.
Mr. Krishnamurthy, would you have done things slightly differently?
Well, I will see there are very many grey areas in the implementation of Model Code of Conduct. So as facts unfold before the Election Commission, a multi-member body goes into the various facts and take a decision. So I mean, it would be improper on my part, without having the full facts, to say that I would have handled it differently. Yes, I would have handled it if the facts are fully available to me, but I will say that the Election Commission has to render justice in a manner that people have credibility in it. So for example, issuing notices, we may have to issue notice to everybody who seemingly violates the Model Code of Law. Even if there is an explanation or justification for the difference in handling it, I think whenever there is even a possible variation in the compliance with the Model Code of Conduct, it is good system to ask for explanation from everybody concerned.
All right, but Dr. Qureshi, Mr. Krishnamurthy, I know you were watching your words, as I'm sure you have to. But, I guess people can read between the lines in what both of you have said. I just want to turn it to everybody else. And perhaps I can start with you, Dr. Balashankar. Implicit in what was being said, and this question of institutions is important because we are hearing this charge coming up again and again and again. And it's a serious question because politics will happen, governments will come, governments will go, ministers will come, ministers will go, even prime ministers will come and prime ministers will go. But ideally, institutions should not in any way be eroded. And now we are starting to hear that charge coming up, which is a worrying charge. Or do you think it's just a political charge?
This kind of giving more autonomy, giving more freedom, and also creating a credibility for the Election Commission started by the NDA governments. And earlier we used to have, not only captive election commissions, we used to have a committed judiciary that talk about censorship of the press, then the kind of rubber stamp president, all these things we had.
Those are going away right now. Censorship of the press is coming back as a question.
No, what I'm saying is
captive press is certainly coming back as an issue right now. So
exactly, but what I'm saying is for almost 6 decades, we have been fighting for independent institutions, and we have been trying to create independent institutions, and electoral reforms also started during the Janata Party government,
so here's
then the NDA.
Here's the question. Whenever anybody is in opposition, obviously you want good institutions, and there's a reason for it. Because having strong, credible institutions is a part of the checks and balances that keeps the abuse of executive power
during the Janata Party government.
Governments always like to not have strong institutions. The opposition and citizens sometimes want strong institutions. So there's that dichotomy. I can understand why the BJP or any opposition party would want strong opposition institutions when they're in opposition. The question is, what do you do when you are in power? Because that's when you want unbridled power.
See, in the last
There's nothing
3
more
years,
fun than having
this
unbridled
government
power.
has not done anything to erode any institution. We have actually been trying to build institutions.
Okay, let me get two people who've been really strong and influential in the government. Overall, try to start with you, Mr. Pandey. The question of institutions, and Mr. Balshankar said that it's that the BJP and this government has been actually pushing to have stronger institutions. Are you, when you're looking at the overall picture, institutions perhaps in any country are always under some sort of an attack. Are they under particular attack right now in your view?
Yes, I do think they are not only under an attack, but they have been largely undermined. And the importance of personalities has gone far more than the importance of institutions. I think
That's a rather strong remark to make. Do you want to substantiate that?
Yes, for you take the institution of the Parliament, for example. Now, there has been a fairly systematic undermining of the institution of Parliament, both in terms of truncated sessions, in terms of control over debate, in terms of passing bills through different mechanisms like taking through the money bill route rather than taking it through other routes. All these, I mean, so the institution of the Parliament has been substantially undermined. Take the institution of the cabinet system of government. We are supposed to follow the Westminster-style cabinet system of government. The cabinet is now largely irrelevant because you have the Prime Minister and the PMO as the supreme authority. The cabinet is only an adjunct to the Prime Minister. The PMO is far more powerful. The Cabinet Secretariat is far less powerful. The Cabinet Secretariat as an institution has been undermined. The Cabinet Secretary today plays the role of a section officer of coordination. Largely, I mean, he really has no role to play.
You seem to be saying it's not just about investigative agencies or the Election Commission as the charge has been made this week. You're making a slightly broader question that even government itself is not entirely functioning in the manner it
I'm
is
talking of
supposed to
institutions, and I think we should distinguish between institutions and agencies.
Okay.
The CBI, in my view, is an agency, not an institution.
Okay.
So you can play around with agencies, but you can't play around with institutions because they are the fundamental, they're the bedrock of our democracy.
Okay, let me get K.C. Singh in on this and then come back to the politics of this. K.C. Singh, would you agree with what he said, or is that overstating it a bit?
Look, this has happened in the past also. Whenever you have a strong Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi used to ride roughshod over the institutions, we got emergency. There's a tendency to override institutions when you have complete control of Parliament and the party. But for about a decade and a half, we didn't have that. We had coalition governments, so the institutions got a rest. But both are at fault. Don't forget that it was the Congress which took a former Chief Election Commissioner, inducted him into politics, made him a minister. In this case, they've taken a former Chief Justice, made him a governor. So when you breach the institutional thing, you've taken a former CAG and said, no, but he's not drawing a salary. And at the same time, you give him the cricket board, you have him sit on the banks to decide which banks are functioning. So you're breaking the walls between institutions. That's extremely important. And that's where, I will not agree that we have some 3 people decide who the election commissioner should be. All over the world, either the executive controls them, judiciary controls them, or you have slightly more autonomous systems. I think the British system is very good, where one election commissioner is nominated by the government, one by the opposition, principal opposition, and one by the smaller parties. So you have 3 of them, and the Speaker's committee then vets the names.
But if being appointed, then doesn't that make it even more political? Because
but there's a balance in it. Instead of having...
But you could have a deadlock, right? We've just seen in the case of the FCC, for example, there's a danger with having pure political appointments is precisely this, that you just vote on party lines.
So and then you end up between efficiency and balance. So if you're going to have balance and make sure that it is not misused, it may be less efficient, but at least there'll be no suspicion about EVMs. Now, much of that may be untrue, but who's going to believe it? So if there is balance in the Election Commission and opposition has a voice there, and you know what happened at the beginning of this government, they said there's no opposition leader. So many of these appointments were held up or not made on because Congress did not have the numbers to be appointed as the opposition leader.
Okay, before I come to you, let me just go back to both the Chief Election Commission and see if they have a response to this. How would you do this then? Mr. Krishnamurthy, why don't I start with you? You heard what K.C. Singh was saying. How would you do it? How can you ensure that the Election Commission nobody can even point a finger, rightly or wrongly, at the Election Commission or the conduct of elections.
No, I entirely agree with the gentleman's mentioning that, some of these appointments after the retirement as member of parliament or as a minister, these are all not very desirable things, or even appointment as a governor. Some election commissioner was appointed as a governor thereafter. So we have to ensure the integrity of the institution. The party in power as well as the party in opposition have a great responsibility to ensure that. And there is a need as far as the appointment is, and appointment not only that, removal also, there are some vagueness in the constitutional provisions. These need to be removed. That is one aspect. But in spite of all that, if an institution has to survive, it depends upon the people who operate the system. Not only the government, but the individual election commissioners as well. They have a responsibility, and I am sure that if the persons appointed are above board, and if they take their decisions above board, there should not be any doubt about even the present system. But there is a scope for improvement, and the collegium system is desirable so that there is a credibility, because sometimes there is an impression that the ruling party has an edge over others. So I entirely agree that these changes are necessary.
So you're right that it depends on the people concerned, and they have to be seen to be fair. But Dr. Qureshi, Ambassador K.C. Singh was suggesting that you could have one from the opposition, one from the government, one in some other way, collegium system, some other way of doing it. Are any of these changes even likely? Because obviously the government of the day would always like to have a certain measure of influence or control, or both.
So Casey has a point. Basically, idea is to balance an institution among parties. But I think collegium system is still better, because same leader party which will appoint a commissioner is a party to the appointment of the commissioner collectively. So it is more or less the same thing. I personally feel collegium system is better. And the second thing which he referred to, and I entirely agree, and with Mr. Krishnamurthy, that the temptation for the future has to be stopped. And the solution is very clear. No further future appointment of any kind, public sector or even private sector. But maybe to compensate for that, instead of pension which is half your last salary, let us get full pension for life, and then be forbidden from doing anything else.
Okay.
That will be a very good guarantee against temptations while you are in office.
That's an interesting possibility for all institutions actually, and it's something worth thinking about.